I'm super excited to be today with composer Jermaine Stegall, and we're going to be talking about his most recent film, Coming to America. Jermaine, great to see you.
Great to see you too. It's been a minute.
Yeah, it's been a minute. Yeah, we first met when you were at the Composers Lab, right, at Skywalker. What year was that?
Yeah, that was actually 2016.
Okay.
Back when we were able to be at the ranch in person and touching things and touching people.
So for you, you've been on an incredible journey since that time. I remember when I first met you, I wouldn't say it was the beginning of your career, but I mean, you definitely have continued to just work on some really incredible projects. And so for folks who aren't familiar with your journey to becoming a composer, what was your path from the early years of school up into getting interested and maybe your first few steps within the industry?
Yeah, I would say, it's kind of, fast forwarding through a lot of, the academic stuff. The end of the academic career ended with the USC film scoring program in 2004, after which point I ended up doing an internship with composer Marco Beltrami on the film I, Robot. And it's, kind of fun note is that, that score was recorded at Fox. And it was an exciting time to see a rewritten score be written so directly and so quickly and recorded in over the course of like 10 days at Fox, and to then be recording the score to Coming to America there so many years later and conducting on that same stage. Actually, the first session I ever went to was a David Newman session for a movie called Duplex at Fox. And so again, that idea of being introduced to what I hoped would be a career at Fox, being able to go back there and record again was a dream come true. But when we met, you and I, in 2016, when I was in the sound design lab, music and sound design lab at Skywalker, that was kind of a point of kind of rebooting, so to speak. Since the days of doing the school thing. I've gone through the gamut of working with different composers. I've worked with, to name a few names, Mark Isham, Blake Neely, Christoph Beck, done programming with Danny Elfman, The Outfit. It's a gamut of different guys that I consider heroes. And so at the point of, the Sundance Lab was really the beginning of rebooting and stepping out of doing more so additional music than my own stuff, and stepping into, okay, let's get this thing, let's really pursue this thing.
That's great. Now, do you feel like, I'm just looking at the types of projects that you've been working on, it goes from, shorts, documentaries, TV miniseries. It feels like, and also most recently working with your buddy Eric on his film Proximity. Where have you always had your eyes set? What are the projects that you're attracted to? What are the things that you're actively trying to foster those relationships?
To me, honestly, John Williams was always the model. It seemed very, 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 very inaccessible to aspire to have that kind of career or do projects with, a giant sweeping orchestra, 90, 100 piece, orchestra epic stories where you're having themes and different things. But that was kind of always the model. And honestly, coming back to the Sundance Labs in 2016, The Force Awakens had come out, the year, or actually about 6 months prior to doing that program in 2015, Christmas. And so the idea of having my own awakening that Lucasfilm specifically was going to be doing projects that were tangible things, not just talk. We're actually going to be doing projects that were new content in that universe was really a major, major focus. So the idea of being at the ranch was a huge, there was a lot of desire to be around those people, around the veterans, and which obviously led to me wanting to go up there and record other scores later after doing the labs. So the film you mentioned, Proximity, that was obviously a prime example. That was a very Amblin influenced score and style, in terms of the filmmaking and the music. I thought, what better place to go there and explore that, but court at Skywalker.
Yeah, I mean, but you also had an opportunity. You got invited to work on this our Star Wars story series, which is
Mhm.
this kind of. Is it mainly web based or is it TV also?
It is web based. I'm
Mhm.
hoping that it'll end up in that similar platform of the the Disney model where you can find all things related to Star Wars. But I ended up while I was at the labs running into an exec from Lucasfilm while I was making it rain in the gift shop for Skywalker swag, and that actually spawned the beginning of more relationships with Lucasfilm. Specifically, several months after that September, I ended up going and doing a film music lecture, presenting my music to the folks at Lucasfilm Animation and Industrial Light and Magic. So that was the beginning of that journey of continuing that relationship in that family. So that was fun.
I mean, that must have been an exciting moment for
It
you
was
to get that.
amazing. And then years later, here we are doing this our Star Wars stories, which is specifically about the legacy of Star Wars and how it affects people and family, and just a really nice, heartfelt, thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. So today we're going to be talking about Coming to America. So for folks who don't know,
Uh,
it's a sequel from the original classic that Eddie Murphy had put together back in 1988. What was your knowledge of the original? What was your relationship to it?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up with the original, and honestly, when I met with Craig, the director, the first question he asked, because we hadn't worked together before, was, "What does Coming to America mean to you?"
Mhm.
And I was like, "Oh man, it's just like there's almost a certain level of nostalgia just thinking about your entire childhood, because that movie really, obviously, I think people hope that would be well received, but I don't think that anyone thought that it would seep into the everyday pop culture that it did over the course of time." And so for me, like, this score to the coming #2 America sequel, every note that I wrote with this movie, it really had to do with paying homage to the legacy of how the first movie made us feel. So really, the sequel really was about giving a nod to the tone and the spirit of the original movie, and just giving audiences a reason and the encouragement to smile, to have fun. And it's not just about a comedy, but things that make us feel warm, things that get us, and there's definitely that need for, a moment of escape during a time of the pandemic. And of course, I'm sure we'll probably talk about what it was like to create a score like
Mhm.
this during the pandemic. But, I think it's very much needed, with a lot of the trends in terms of the dark tone that has been kind of looming over
Yeah,
not just our country but the whole world.
yeah, yeah. It was really fun. I had a chance to go back and watch the original film last week before,
Oh,
and it's just like the connective tissue between the first one and the second one. I was just so curious, like, are we going to see the same characters? Are we going to see some of those same similar moments, those homages that are so well, like, just they carry over? And then obviously, like, the addition of Wesley Snipes, obviously, in this one is just like
oh yeah.
super welcomed.
Super well.
Yeah. So when Craig, I mean, because the first one was John Landis.
Mhm.
What what was the direction Craig had given you? What was some early picture or script? Like, what was the initial marching orders direction that he had for you?
Yeah, honestly, the very beginning crux of the conversation had to do with the fact that they needed to start shooting and they needed music on set to shoot to. So they pitched me a couple of ideas of things that were going to be happening in the story. And after writing a couple of those musical passes at what my interpretation of that, and along with just the celebration of the first movie,
Mhm.
it's kind of nodded their heads, and like, this kind of feels like we're all making the same movie here. And then after which point I read the script, um and they had started shooting, and I was continuing to write and just send ideas, and everything just continued to click with the needs that they had. Some different moments involving percussion, different moments involving dance, different moments involving singing that needed to happen on screen, facilitated the need to actually record live vocals so that we can get a sort of exact version of how things will be performed on camera, and how the story is going to be told using music.
Yeah. I mean, the film, just like the second one starts off in the same
Uh,
style with the logo pushing like past the
yeah.
mountains,
Uh-huh.
and it's a really exciting energy that you have to
Yeah.
start with because we're returning to King
Yeah.
Akeem now. And
Yeah.
so what did you want? Like, was this one of your first cues that you'd worked on, or what was the evolution of this one for your main
Actually,
title?
let me think. The first cue that I actually wrote, and it's funny enough
Mhm.
that it was just literally me. I think I watched the opening, the first 10 minutes of the movie, and then just turned it off and just like kind of tried to write something that evoked a feeling, the tone of the pageantry and the royalty of the royal family, so to speak. Ended up being a cue that wasn't used in the way that I thought it would be used in the movie, but we did when we got to our scoring session at Fox. It was the first cue that we recorded. I forgot that it was the first thing I wrote. Um, but it was talked about that there would be a main title sequence similar to the first movie. And what you hear in the film is very, 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 very close to exactly what I wrote in the demo version for This Is What I See. And they talked about the cameras would sweep like this, and you would see, the mountains, and you'd see trees.
Mhm.
I thought, at the end of the day, how can we build off of the musical approach, and yeah, the thematic material that you see, or at least the sound and spirit of the first movie? How can we make that bigger and more, more, give it some more energy and say, look, let's feel good about the way, everyone's, that is kind of iconic, but that floating sequence in the first movie over the land of this, this fairy tale kingdom of the Zamunda. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was probably the second thing that I wrote.
Amazing. Just listening to the track just by itself, there's so much going on. You have voices, horns,
Yeah.
uh, percussion that's like just like coming in and out. How did you structure it? How do you even approach a cue like this? Because it doesn't really it's more of the energy of the track that you're trying to, I feel like, establish, where
Yeah.
it's like
Yes.
just the exuberance of this kingdom. So yeah, how do
Yeah.
you even start about sketching out or templating
I mean,
this?
the very first pass, I think it had more to do heavily with percussion specifically.
Mhm.
Um, and then I decided later, after it was they re-edited the timing of it. I think it ended up being about 3 minutes at our first pass,
Hmm.
tacking on kind of an intro that said, um, kind of a welcoming the audience into this land and establishing that we're going on a journey. That was the idea. And then also there's some text that I had spoken in there. I think I had some translation of
Mhm.
some lyrics that basically have to do with welcoming the audience to the motherland. Is subtly an Easter egg in there for anyone that understands either Swahili or Yoruba, which was a language it's native to West Africa, which is where Zamunda would be. But yeah, the idea was that it needed to be energetic, and even when there are different sections, sectionally speaking, in the composition, that the energy it doesn't go away, but there's pageantry, there's excitement, and there's anticipation, and
Mhm.
it's cut down quite a bit from where it was. But these the characters that you see introducing the movie and walking through, and not to give too much away, but throwing roses, I'll say, oh, they walked for a long time.
Yeah.
That was fun. um
Um,
you know
I have to ask because like the only other film that I can even compare this to of just like this magical land, obviously, is the White Elephant of Black Panther. I feel
yeah,
like it's hard to ignore just
it's the elephant in the room for sure. you know
what can you say just about like this film was way, this is
yeah,
20 plus years before Black Panther ever existed.
yeah,
I'm not saying
exactly.
there's I'm just curious of like people not being like, well, we want what Black Panther did
You
because
know what? I
yeah.
could absolutely speak to that, because the idea was, the first coming to America film in terms of the culture was definitely the first thing. And it's one of the reasons that Black Panther was so successful, is that
Mhm.
there was not such a dramatization of situations that were basically negative or coming from a place of lack when it
Right.
concerned Black culture specifically. So, you know I think everyone everyone involved in Black Panther knows that Coming to America happened first. But there was a reference at one point in the film about the land of Wakanda, and I think you get that a little bit in the trailer. But yeah, the ideal, I even asked everyone involved, please let's not tempt this movie in any way, shape, or form with Black Panther, because this is a very different thing. I'm not going to Africa to do any recording. This is a situation where it's like I just wanted the voice to just come out of me in terms of the feeling and the spirit of the first film. Is really, it's an uplifting comedy with heart and romance, and obviously adventure and some other fun moments. But I wanted to stay away from, as far as I could, the idea of trying to copy Black Panther or any of that stuff.
It's not even about you copying. It's about everyone else just being like, oh, I've been here before. Isn't this Wakanda?
Honestly, there was never really anyone pointing me in the direction of that, thankfully.
Yeah, it's so interesting because when I listened to the second track, McDowell's track, it feels fundamentally, it has like the electric guitar, there's things that are quintessential when you talk about maybe music from Africa, or from maybe that just like represents this community or the energy. So where do you look? Is it the type of instrumentation? Is it the type of players?
To be honest, I made a playlist for myself just to listen to in the car, when I was driving to the studio, of music that felt a certain way. And really it had to do with groove, it had to do with rhythms, that I found and studied that were pretty native to popular and contemporary music from West Africa specifically, just in terms of groove. So almost any cue, whether it be comedy or romance, any cue that had a groove to it, it had to start with a certain feel behind it that felt very authentic to where Zamunda takes place in terms of its groove. And then of course there are lyrics, text that you hear a little bit subtly in that McDowell's cue that repeat the phrase Ikabo Si Elewa, which means welcome to the motherland. Is another thing that you hear in the main title as well. And you hear that throughout the film as well. Which is
That's awesome.
Trying to say it's a tribal element to it, but it adds a smile to your face.
Yeah. Something that's consistent is percussion, and I feel like the patterns and the styles are so unique to this type of music. How do you educate yourself? How do you write for this type of percussion?
I actually ended up coming across a really cool percussionist, Sidney Hobson, who had been doing a lot of work, more and more so with Danny Elfman, specifically doing a lot of solo percussion work. And we started talking about instruments that he had access to. And he, not only that, but I came across an Instagram page that someone hit me to that he had. And he had this one video of himself snapping his fingers really fast. He's doing all these rhythms. I can't even do what he was doing. But I was like, okay, this guy, I'm going to write a cue just so he can snap his fingers over it, literally. And there's one cue later in the movie that I was just like, just have a heyday of finger snapping. And there's a lot of things that he could do that were like really unique to, I've literally never heard that before. I wanted there to be a visceral kind of primal element to something. So that's where you hear a couple of and different elements that are vocal that are also rhythmic within the score as well. But, bass marimbas, glass marimbas, African marimbas, wooden marimbas, metal marimbas, all these different things. Like he was, he gave me all these different examples of things that we could use, and I was like, okay, let's just do it all. Let's do everything you got. Let's
right,
go.
Yeah, that's awesome. This film is a comedy. Like and that's what I forgot about the first one. Like I forgot how much it lives in the comedic space. I mean, John Landis as the director, that's from his history of filmmaking and whatnot. I just feel like you give Eddie Murphy the leash to be all these characters and everyone else. It fundamentally feels like is how much of it lies in reality, how much of it is in this like kind of hyper real kind of, I don't know, make believe world, just because it's obviously set within our our time. I mean, today's world, but it still harkens back to like these kind of comedic things, and your cues help lean into things that I feel like composers who are writing for comedies have to kind of help with, of these like kind of like little comedic moments that the characters are doing. And I felt like a lot of your cues, not a lot of them, but there's a lot of moments throughout the film that calls for that. Did you spot for those, or did Craig call those out?
Yeah, that's something we talked about early on. Is I was like, okay, just like you said, we know that at the end of the day, we're delivering a comedy. Like, people need to be laughing. Like, if they're not laughing, number one, something's wrong. However, the music cannot be funny music. It can't be comedic. It can't be silly. It can't be things that the music can't embarrass the movie, if that makes any sense. It's not silly. Like, it's heartfelt moments that are very genuine. And, you know, he even talked about, you know, Akeem, Eddie Murphy's character in the first movie. He's a very compassionate person. Like, he has very real feelings, and he's honestly in this movie, his you know, it's no secret that he's discovered that he has a son, and in the journey that we're taking in the sequel, like, his son is doing a lot of things that he did in the first movie, and having feelings that he felt, which of course make it feel even more real for Akeem to accept his son where he is. So we need to lean into why it's okay to be supportive to that character as well. And so, you know, there are funny moments. I always say, like, you got to let the comedy play and either give room to it or support the storyline behind it. But the idea of being silly with the music, like, Craig and I were so on board with staying away from that immediately, because that's not the story either one of us wanted to tell.
Yeah. Did you have to pull any melodies or any things that were introduced in the first film? Was there any crossover that you had
Actually, yeah. So Nile Rodgers was the composer of the score for the first movie, and there was utter encouragement and support to use thematic material from the song that he wrote, which was performed by the System, called "Coming to America." So there were several moments where you actually, an audience might not remember that they're familiar with that melody, but I made sure to lean into it, because that song does end up, you know, not to spoil too much, but in our movie as well. And so I think it helps tie in the story when we finally hear the song played out with sung lyrics in this movie.
Yeah. And then obviously, like, I don't want to give too much away in the movie, but there's these moments when there's these kind of cameo performances by a litany of artists.
A litany. I mean, that was magical. Honestly, you know, it's even mentioning that, I forget, you know, having been on set with some of these people, to get to walk up to some of them and just, like, you're a fan of their work or their legacy in their own right, and or having been involved in recording sessions for some of these people before they were actually shooting. It just seemed like this whirlwind of a process that I could not have predicted, in terms of the amount of star power and firepower, and people that was just literally happy to just be involved because they were a fan of the first movie. I mean, the movie, you know, brought so much levity to people's lives over the years. And I'll just say specifically, I remember, you know, it wasn't a musical thing, but Wesley Snipes showing up to set one day, and he pulls out his iPhone and he's taking pictures of the set. I don't know what he's doing, but I thought to myself, you're Wesley Snipes. Like, don't you do all this? But he was so happy. I could see it. You know, even Tracy Morgan made a comment. He was like, no, I'm just happy. I can't do it. He didn't do a Tracy Morgan impersonation, but he was describing how happy he was to just be a part of the history and the legacy of the first film. Yeah. And I was like, these guys are really, like, are making this feel like the big deal that I know that it is, but I'm trying not to think about that, like, and just enjoy it and get the job done and try to, you know, soak up the process. Because it's like, it seemed like a thing that, you know, is fleeting, that, like you said, these cameos, you would get a project where all that kind of energy is just, like, surrounding you every single day.
I mean, Morgan Freeman of himself, I was like, is that Morgan Freeman's voice? And then sure enough, it's Morgan Freeman. I'm just like, wow, like everybody got into this project.
Right, you're so like, cool. Who isn't?
What did you, I mean, you know, I would say this is probably one of the bigger projects that you've had a chance to work on.
Yeah.
What can you say just about, now that you've been through the project now, you're looking back, what was one of the major takeaways of having a chance to work on a film of this size and scope, and just all the creative folks that were
You know
involved
what,
with it?
to be honest, I think the idea of trying to enjoy something like this, I would say the pandemic, it gave me something to focus on for sure, because I was pretty immersed in it when the summer hit last year. And, a lot of things with Black Lives Matter were going crazy outside our doors in terms of in the streets and protests and riots and things. While I was actually trying to be creative, the idea of, I don't know, just really having something to not only focus on, but the idea that at a certain point there's going to be a light at the end of the tunnel, and people are going to need that levity. So the idea of really focusing on that, it was, I felt like there's a certain level of responsibility, but the idea in terms of takeaway would be, to enjoy all these moments, enjoy being on set. Like, that's not something that even with indie films that I was always able to do.
Yeah.
To literally walk around and talk to the actors, to walk up to Morgan Freeman, who's only there for the day, and tell him to his face that I wrote music specifically for your your moment on camera, and have him tell me he can't wait to hear it. It's like bucket list moment, right? So trying to soak it in and not be so focused in the requirements of the job, but just actually allow myself to actually enjoy the process. That was definitely a big takeaway.
A lot of choir and a lot of use of it throughout. Some solos, some like just ensembles. How did you want to structure it? How did you even go about, putting all the voices together? Where did you find folks, and how did you guys record them?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, I have a huge background in, the church in terms of gospel music, spiritual music, choral music, Christian music. And so the idea that there would be, a certain level of soul or choir or intimate, singing or solos was like always a part of the idea of the sound of Zamunda for me. Our first recording session was at Capitol Records with, I think it might have been 12 or 13 vocalists, which were all female. We recorded that for part of the main title sequence, specifically to shoot to. And then after I started shooting, I had another session at Sunset Sound with, I think it was 9 vocalists, mixture of sorts. And I talked a lot with a friend specifically about, if I could have my wish list of vocalists, like let's get like a top 20, top 30, and then I'll have to narrow it down from there. But again, that's where a lot of the ideas of chanting, specific text that would be sung, where that would, kind of play into. And then when COVID happened, our woodwinds had to record at home, drums, bass, and guitar all at home. And then vocalists, I ended up using 5 singers to record at home. They that's changed the approach. It actually became, and more, I think, informative of telling the story, a more intimate sound as it pertains to vocals specifically. So the sound became more about not so much the choir approach, but more of, just the sound of that intimate, kind of visceral, approach. So yeah.
Was Eddie at all involved? I mean, he has a writing credit. Was he involved with any of the post creative decisions?
I think he was pretty involved with making sure everything was on par with, the vision. I mean, it's his story. He's credited as a writer and producer. I did get to meet him briefly on set, and it was kind of a funny moment because there's so many things to do that the conditions and the way that I met him, it was just like a very high pressure situation that we needed to take our time with. It was just like, oh, by the way, Eddie, here's our composer, Jermaine. Hey, how's it going? Great.
Oh God, yeah.
Like, and it was just one of those great moments. But he was very involved, to my knowledge, and I know that he loves music, and I've heard him talk about making sure that every element, including music, in this movie was in line with the overall, tone that that this movie is. A very specific movie, very different from the first one. And just to know that we were all on the same page making the same movie, and that he was fully supportive of that, was
Mhm.
like, okay, this is the package, this is the
Mm.
thing.
So when did you have all of your material put together? Or when did you start to really, you felt like you were in the thick of getting production and recordings and understanding where cues were going to lie? Like what, I guess, like what months was that in terms of?
Yeah, so I got a rough assembly around January of 2020, and just started, getting updates. And
Mhm.
to my, recollection, there never really was a locked version of the picture. There were just different versions. And I would say around March, right before the shutdowns happened, was when we were getting into versions that I can actually write sequences of score to, and actually time things out and see how things were working. And then when the shutdowns happened, I actually moved my studio twice. Ended up where I'm at now in July of last year. And I think I ended up having a recording session with an organist at a church down near Inglewood over the summer in July. Also had a guitar session remotely in July. A lot of things are pieced together in ways that there's certain live elements that I have to record to have them mocked up, because it'll only sell it, it'll only be sold a certain way if, if certain people that I knew I wanted to play on it were actually playing in my initial, presentation. So some of those things were happening in July. And I think we started talking about recording it. Originally, we were supposed to record in June, but of course, COVID hit. Everyone was forgiven of all original plans. And then August, September became more of a reality. And so I would say about September was when I was pretty close, 80% done with the score. And then in October, we ended up recording at Fox with our string session for a day, and then brass for a day. And then at that same time, we had drums, bass, guitar, harp, all recording remotely,
Mm.
and our vocalists all recording the same week, and percussion, all recording remotely at separate locations all over town. One person was actually on an island, but everyone was grabbing Pro Tools sessions and uploading files all the same week, and things are being assembled. And it's kind of magical that we sit back and go, oh, it all worked out, but a little bit chaotic. But it
Did
was fun.
did you have additional support staff to help? I mean, did you have to, I guess, be the wrangler of parts, or once you?
Actually,
Yeah.
the way this worked out, and I always wanted this to be a situation where, Coming to America is such a big IP, and I felt like I'm going to look back on this for so much in my career, that I want to look back and say that, number one, I wrote every note, because, there's a pandemic going on. So there's time to actually manage
Yeah.
changes. There are a lot of picture changes happening. I wasn't juggling a lot of projects at the same time. So it allowed for me to actually be the full-on creative voice to this movie. But Bill Ross was involved as an orchestrator, and he's someone that's been a huge hero. Always enjoyed his orchestrations. In his own right, had an amazing career as a composer and arranger. Working with him was just like incredible, and like the mock-ups were very specific. So I think that also helped him to be pretty exact with what he knew that I was probably looking for, in terms of it being crunch time and getting ready to record. And then Mark Graham and those guys at JKMS also helped with orchestration and copying, as things kind of last minute came through the pipeline, in terms of just moving those
Mm.
live record needs through the process. But yeah, in terms of coordinating things, like I did most of it all in this room, and like was
Mm.
on the phone, and stems were being printed by someone else while we were recorded at different hours and different times, and it worked out.
It did work out.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that the pandemic like helped, was the idea of self-managing all these things, and also kind of making decisions on like certain cues I knew I had to record live, but then
Mhm.
being like, I was informed that certain scenes might be coming in after our recording session, and how's
Oh
that
wow.
going to go down, and then how our stem's going to be printed for those things. The pandemic allowed for that. It made that, be a smooth process in terms of, I got you covered, whatever, And, we had dates to adhere to, but I honestly don't think I was at any point really worried about getting any of the work done, or any of the tasks, any of the direction, any of the things that everyone was asking, to the goals that we're trying to achieve through music. For some reason, at no point was I worried. Like, it was a very peaceful process, very solitary, unfortunately. I would rather have had Craig here in my studio, giving feedback and vibing, talking about movies that we grew up on, because he has a lot of similar interests. But it was what it was, and
Yeah.
good thing is I think people will smile.
Yeah, absolutely. What program or where do you go in writing? Is it on keys? Like, what's your kind of first
um,
step for writing?
Honestly, I've been doing a lot of mock-ups here with, just using Digital Performer and
Hmm.
a lot of the tools that people normally use. But I think most of the vocal mock-ups, came from, in some cases I wanted, like you said, it is very colorful. You're saying the opening cues had a lot going on. you know um, I wanted to do very specific things with voices, and I wanted a lot of chord changes and different things. So, like, I would, write the notes out and then sing each individual note into the mock-up, so that the parts can be isolated and have a little bit of complexity and fun with the harmonies when it came to the vocalist doing their thing at home. But yeah, the percussion was, extensive, uh, very detailed mock-ups in terms of how I wanted things, and also able to, support a lot of the live playing, and in some cases also have him just run with certain ideas. So yeah.
That's awesome. I'm looking at this. Well, I'm thinking of the finale of. I mean, there's a lot of key moments. I mean, the barbershop in of itself. I mean,
Mhm.
there's not necessarily music cues through then, but when you get to Queens,
Yeah.
um, was there a different approach about how what you wanted it to sound or what it needed to
Yeah, the
be?
very first time that Eddie, his character Akeem, arrives in Queens, like, I wanted to be a very different sound. It wasn't going to be a sound that was consistent with all of New York, but I wanted
Yeah,
all of a sudden it to feel, you know, very anticipatory
yeah,
and urban. Like, it needs to feel like he's out of place. Like, when we're in Zamunda, it feels like, we've established a Zamundan sound, and there's a certain level of, our, conventional orchestral scoring that you hear, you know, in other parts of the movie. When we get to Queens, like, the idea is that, like, he should feel a little out of place. So it has to feel a little bit off kilter from the rest of the score.
hmm
But yeah, you're talking about there's a kind of a back and forth moment towards the end of the movie, which also has a certain level of urban but anticipatory. We're driving towards a thing, type feel in it as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting just to see how many cues just in this current list of from the film.
Hmm.
There's sometimes there's really sweeping moments that I feel like in films, it's like music is going to lead, and I think in this film that maybe the challenge is that there aren't there's always story, there's always kind of dialogue scenes, and your music, I feel like, is used a little differently, and not it's like it's meant to support the dialogue scene versus having to carry it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, can you just talk about like the difference of having to like fully carry moments versus just supporting what's the dialogue scenes or
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, that's the funny thing about, like, these iconic characters, like, looking at them on screen and, like, finally, uh, allowing, some of these super crazy strong performances, or just the look of someone showing up on set, like, sells half the story
Yeah.
in some cases. And when Lavelle and his mother show up in Zamunda, like, there's a certain level of obviously fun that the audience needs to feel, but it needs to have that delicate balance between the sound of Zamunda, a contemporary sound, them being out of place, Zamundans feeling a little out of place. But there's a lot of intimate, sweet moments where, Akeem is talking to his wife and trying to figure out things, trying to figure out this new phase in life. But, it's not just about, his role as prince, but he's now king. He's a father. We're getting to the heart of some conversations between him and the character Lisa's father. When they're having a fatherly conversation, because that's now the major father figure in his life. It's really about supporting the heart of the story and not necessarily telling something the audience something that they don't necessarily know. They know it.
Yeah.
They see they're along with the ride, but just really supporting that was a fun thing to do. It really dictated the tone and the pace, just allowing them to do their thing.
Yeah. So in regards to pace with the film editors, it looks like there was David Clark, Billy Fox, and Deborah Neil Fisher. How much interaction, how much feedback did you have from the picture team? Like you were saying, it was kind of a rolling edit, ongoing changes. Are you responding to their edit, or what was the interaction?
I think I was supplying some ideas for things, as they were trying to figure out specifically. There's a pretty elaborate scene with a task that Lavelle, Akeem's newfound son, he has to accomplish to kind of prove himself. And that was one that everyone's trying to figure out what is the best way to approach this thing. So it really gave early on Billy Fox some ideas to get started on. And then when Deborah came on, we had some pretty cool conversations just about, making the audience smile and the simple needs of the film. You need to feel grounded in a certain level of culture. Otherwise the story doesn't work. What I mean? It can't just be your typical, pizzicato strings for all moments. It just does. It literally makes the story go. It's less. You don't buy it. But then at the end of the day, it needs to have a delicate balance of all the things. So I was working pretty closely. At a certain point before COVID hit, I was talking to Paramount about moving my studio onto the lot, just because for this movie, I just wanted to jump completely in, and it was approved and it was going to happen and all these things, and then literally no one was coming to the lot, so it didn't make any sense, and the editors were working from home, and so we, as best as we could, we stayed, as a unit, when the different editors were involved.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see how everyone's navigated it in their own way. Everyone fundamentally is working at home and having to try to recreate the collaboration that naturally would happen if you were in the same space. It's just great to hear that, the show can still go on. We don't need to necessarily put things on the shelf and wait for COVID to pass. But I just feel like it's a real challenge to really look back and be like, well, what do I need around me to get the job done?
Yeah. Even Craig, was talking about this new process when we got to our final dub stage moment. So we dubbed for about 3, if not 4 weeks. And the first 3 weeks of that, he was in Memphis in his home theater, listening through to the mixes in 5.1 there, just to give the initial rounds of notes. And the last week we mixed at Sony, he came up for that. But even with our scoring session, no one that was not essential to the actual recording of the music was allowed to be at the session. So director wasn't allowed, no producers allowed, no assistants, no camera crew. It's just whoever is absolutely needed to get the music recorded are the only people allowed to be. There's a limit to the amount of people that can actually stand on the physical stage in terms of the amounts of players that you can have. With CDC guidelines, every player had to have a COVID test. It was a very different process. But the one thing I definitely will miss will be, when I say miss, I hope it will return sooner than later, will be the idea of having the entire group of performers, if you prefer that, to be allowed to do them all in the same room, especially woodwinds. They're the thing that glue the orchestra together in terms of, the things that help support the string section. They're glue. They're so essential to have them in the room. And to be honest, that really changed the way I used woodwinds more of a soloistic way,
Mhm.
as opposed to the way I would use them if they were sitting in the room, and
Yeah.
how I even wrote for them.
Yeah, so true. It's, I am not a composer. I do not know how you guys, musical magicians, are able to do what you do, but I feel like, it's really exciting to think about the projects that have led up to this one for you, and
Mm,
just how you can kind of take all of your experience and be like, all right, if I'm ever going to have an opportunity
yeah.
to, work on a project of this nature,
Yep.
now or never. Because
Yeah.
yeah, I'd be so curious, what to you would you say to yourself, young composer Jermaine? What was your takeaway? What's your perspective now, being that you've had a chance to work on
I
this
never
film?
really would have thought that this project would have been this kind of project, because I
Hmm.
would say that in terms of my, early days as a saxophonist and thinking that that was going to be my career, I knew I was going to have a career in music for sure. When I started playing saxophone, there was something that clicked, that music was going to be the thing.
Yep.
It wasn't necessarily composer, but never did I guess that, my backgrounds and, I mean, going to, as a kid, jazz camps for a week, you know what I mean? Marching band, my love of conducting, my love of choir, my love of, certain styles of music, small ensemble music, my obsession with percussion, my obsession with drummers. Like on Instagram, I'm following all these drummers that are doing all these crazy things. I just love rhythm,
Hmm.
and think about that for hours and hours. When YouTube was first like gaining popularity, I was one of those people that the algorithms of seeing all these drummers on your right side of the screen, like I just was tumbling down the rabbit hole of drummer, that things like that would play into my love of percussion and drums and rhythm and sophisticated rhythms and different things. Um, this movie was, if people are, they're looking for sometimes a project that will encapsulate their voice as an artist. Like everything that I've ever done musically in my entire life, at some point or another, I had to actually implement that into scoring this movie. Like
Hmm.
that's what I would say to my younger self is, don't worry, you'll get to do that. Don't that thing that that whole situation that you got, it's like literally, whether it be action, adventure, chase, romance, like comedy, like every single thing that I could think that would be needed was required to tell this story. So I
That's
would tell
awesome.
my younger self, don't worry, it'll happen. Maybe all in one project, but it'll happen.
So cool. Well, I mean, this film comes out very soon here, March 5th. It's going to be on Amazon, through Amazon Studios. It's going to be exciting for folks to have a chance to go revisit these characters. Any time, I was like, are they going to bring back X, Y, and Z character? And of course they
Yeah,
did. To me, it's just like just it's so fun, and I
yeah.
feel like, the first film holds up, and I feel like this film is
Mhm.
right there next to it.
Yep.
For folks who want to keep track of you and what you're up to, where's a good way? Are you on social media? Where can they find you?
I am on social media. If you just search Jermaine Stegall, you pretty much find me.
Make it easy. And what's coming up for you? What are some of the projects on the horizon? What does this year look like?
This year looks interesting. One film I'm just starting now for Universal, which is a psychological thriller. That should be very interesting, and a sharp right turn from the comedic, romantic Coming to America vibe. It's going to be one to sonically, hopefully, turn some heads and go, wait a minute, what?
So cool.
It's that kind of vibe. So
Awesome. Well, Jermaine, so great to connect and hear about this film. Congratulations on this project. And I'm excited to see what the next. I feel like every time I check in with you, you have something else going on that's so exciting. And
thank
yeah,
you.
it's great to see people gravitate towards your music and your work. So
Well, thank you. Totally appreciate it.